Good evening. The Honorable Consul General of Egypt, Honorable Consul General of Israel, Professor Wimpheimer, the Director of the Center for the Crown Family Center for Jewish and Israel Studies, esteemed faculty members, students. I do see a student or two. Dear guests, I'm Eli Reches, and I'm the Crown Professor for Israel Studies. And on behalf of Northwestern and the Crown Family Center for Jewish and Israel Studies, I would like to welcome you all to this panel discussion on Gaza and beyond, Israel, the Palestinians, and the Arab world. Tonight's event is organized by the Crown Family Center for Jewish and Israel Studies, and it's important to say, is co-sponsored by MENA, the program on Middle East and North African Studies at Northwestern. Now, you might be somewhat confused by the different centers on board, so let me explain. This is a collaborative effort between us here at Northwestern and the Crown Center for Middle East Studies at Brandeis. So thank you all for coming, the guests from Brandeis, and we look forward to visit you next time. You know, in the academia, or let me briefly share with you an anecdote that after the Oslo Accords, there were many, the common language was confident building measures. Everybody was talking about confident building measures. Now, in the academia, it was turned into conference building measures. So, welcome to Northwestern, and we look forward to visit you. So, I would like also to extend a special thanks to Crown Philanthropies for making this event possible. And before I forget, I should thank Nancy Gelman. Where are you, Nancy? Nancy? Who was indispensable in organizing tonight's event. Now, titles for academic events are a tricky business. Anyone who has organized academic events know that. At times when we are not really focused on what the event is all about, one goes to the banal, cliché titles like the Palestinians, past, present, and future. What did you say? Anything can go under that. Or the Middle East, change and continuity, another popular title. I want to believe that ours has more to it. We will begin with an identical question to all panelists that pertains to the Gaza war. But then the focus will move to beyond, Gaza and beyond. So there are 4 topics on my list: sectarianism and the Arab nation state, political Islam, Hamas and the political scene, and post-war Israel. God willing, we'll be able to cover 2, given the 4 hours that we have tonight. No, but and if we have enough time, which we will open the floor for discussion. So we have 4 panelists and a moderator, and the time is short. So I should say that time management will be strict, at times harsh. Allow me to introduce the panelists very quickly. Shai Feldman is the Judith and Sidney Schwartz Director of the Crown Center for Middle East Studies and Professor of Politics at Brandeis University. He's also a senior fellow and a member of the Board of Directors of Harvard University's Belfer Center for Science, International Affairs. In 2001-2003, Shai served as a member of the UN Secretary General Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters. And I should add a personal word. We both come from Tel Aviv University. Shai has been for many years the director of the Center for Strategic Studies. Nabeel Khoury, whom we welcome to Northwestern, has just joined us this last month, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Nabeel Khoury is a senior fellow of Middle East and National Security at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and a visiting scholar at the Middle East and North African Studies program at Northwestern University. I should add, Nabeel has acquired a lot of experience on the field, on the ground. He was a civil service for the U.S. State Department. He served in different places. He was the Consul General of the U.S. in Casablanca. He served as a deputy head of mission in Yemen and has, as I said, acquired a lot of experience. Abdel Monem Saeed Ali. Wow, this, by the way, I have shortened significantly all those bios here. And I apologize if I omit any, but you'll have a chance to edit when the Q&A part begins. So, Saeed Ali, whom I had the pleasure to meet right after the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt was struck, is the chairman of the board, CEO, and director of the Regional Center for Strategic Studies in Cairo. He's also chairman of Al-Masry Al-Youm, a leading Arabic language daily newspaper in Egypt, and a senior fellow at the Crown Center for Middle East Studies at Brandeis University. Previously, Saeed Ali was the president of the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies in Cairo and the chairman of the board and CEO of the Al-Ahram newspaper. Anyone who is familiar with Egypt in general, Egyptian politics, would be familiar with that. Last but not least, Khalil Shikaki, the Goodman Senior Fellow at the Crown Center for Middle East Studies at Brandeis. Khalil Shikaki has become synonymous to Poles in the Palestinian and Arab society. He has directed the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research in Ramallah since 2000 and has conducted more than 100 polls among Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, including a most recent one to which I will refer when the real panel begins. A world-renowned expert on Palestinian public opinion and a widely published author. Apropos author, I should show you this. This is a new book that just came out published by the Center for Middle East Studies at Brandeis, authored by Abdel Monem Saeed Ali, surprisingly, Shai Feldman, and Khalil Shikaki. It's called Arabs and Israelis. It's a basic textbook for anyone who does Middle East teaching. And while I'm at it, I have to share with you a question that I had. There is a dove here. Now, I'm trying to break my head. Is it flying away from the piece, or is it flying towards the piece? But this is a question for students to... Okay. Before we proceed, may I ask you kindly to shut off your cell phones. I would much appreciate that. So let's begin with now I move to my seat, with your permission. So I would like to begin with the first identical question, which is addressed to all four panelists. I would give you 3 minutes, and I'm generous. And it's a very simple and non-complex question. Who won the Gaza war? Or rather, who lost the Gaza war?
I'll take the second one.
Khalil, you begin. And again,
Abbas lost the Gaza war. And he lost it because he and his political party lost a great deal of popular support. His legitimacy has declined considerably as a result of the war. He lost it because his way, diplomacy, negotiations, is no longer trusted. The war dealt a very heavy blow to diplomacy and negotiations. Hamas's way has gained significant public support. Most Palestinians, including those in the West Bank, who before the war overwhelmingly rejected violence and Hamas's way, after the war supported violence and Hamas's way.
Does it show in your studies?
Indeed, it does. In fact, we did a survey. You said 3 minutes though, so
I know.
I'm
don't
not
worry.
going- This is the second question. Do I get another 3 minutes for that?
Welcome to the Middle East.
Okay. You complicated the question for me, so
It's okay.
you have to pay a price for that. And the third price that Abbas paid, I think, is that he lost his ability to compromise. Public support for compromise went down considerably as a result of the war. With these three, Abbas, I think, has become more belligerent in the language he uses. Look at what he did and said at the UN, and look at what he said just 2-3 days ago about events in Jerusalem. And I see him moving this time more seriously than at any other time towards a direct diplomatic confrontation with Israel at the UN. Okay. For these reasons, I think Abbas came out as the big loser.
Okay. Abdel Monem, if I may, can you perhaps focus on Hamas, as Hamas won the war? We know who lost it from
Can I have the liberty of
of course.
a different approach? You know,
Please.
because I differ with Khalil actually about, war is a very serious business, and I don't think it is a beauty contest in which public opinion can be the judge on that. A war is judged basically not by the approach of the pacifists who tell you that everybody lost, because everybody lost something, or by people who make only the Second World War the measure for adjudicating wars by saying who surrendered in this war. So all Middle East war always have an element of inconclusiveness. And as such, we should understand who won and who lost. I believe there is people who got, there is parties that got more than others. I think Abbas is a winner in that one. And I will say Abbas is a winner because he changed the equation, the political equation between him and the Hamas. And even Khalil's polls tell us that the immediate results that came as polling after the war was to the benefit of Hamas. The polls that came after show that there is a decline of that. So public opinion takes time to really absorb the new situation. The reality is the agreement that they come to allowed Abbas and the BA to come to the crossing point, which give Israel a win, something that was the crossing points were the standing between Israel and Gaza to make life possible for both of them, because Hamas took over the crossing point. I think also Egypt won. Egypt won that it came back to the scene. Not only came back to the scene, but two of its competitors lost, Turkey and Qatar. So in terms of political realities, I think the whole, if you put things together, I think we have another war was won against Islamic fundamentalism, which I think it is a major war that's taking place in the region today. It lost Egypt, it lost in Gaza, and hopefully it will lose in Kobani.
We'll come back to that momentarily.
I am just giving you.
Thank you, Abdel Monem.
Get a right
I
to
sincerely.
rebuttal?
No. But we go by the plan
All right.
at this stage. So for some reason, Israel was not mentioned.
I said Israel won
I know,
the
but
crossing point.
Shai, I'll give you the pleasure.
I feel very comfortable here. I'm on neutral ground. I actually don't think that there were, between Israel and, let's say, the Palestinians, or Israel and Hamas, I don't think there was a winner. Because I don't think that fundamentally anything has changed. The war has not changed fundamentally the situation in Gaza. It's resulted in marginal concessions that were required to bring the fighting to an end. Concessions with respect to what goes into Gaza, concessions with respect to the depth of the territorial waters in which Gaza fishermen are allowed to fish. But the fundamental reality of Gaza, which is that it's essentially, say, isolated by Israel and by Egypt, has not changed. So in terms of Hamas's ability to deliver to the Gaza population, nothing's fundamentally changed. There were no gains as far as Gaza is concerned. On the other side, Israel has not gained in this. And in some ways, the tragedy of these 51 days of fighting is that nobody's actually gained. And the situation, the basic situation, hasn't changed. I would say, though, that if you talk about internally, then I think internally the most important impact of these 51 days of fighting, which add to previous encounters, whether it's the Second Lebanon War in 2006, whether it's the war with Hamas in 2008, 9, and in 2012, it's made the resolution of the conflict more difficult. It's made the resolution of the conflict more difficult because it continued this path of sensitizing the Israeli population to the security concerns. And just to add one sentence to this, it's a very simple equation here. Israelis, rightly or wrongly, conclude from these experiences that if this is what Israel experienced as a result of the withdrawal from Lebanon, as a result of the withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, imagine what would be the fate if Israel withdrew similarly from the West Bank. In a situation where 80% of the population and the GDP of Israel's production would be in similar distances to the effects from Lebanon on northern Israel and from Gaza on the
Shai,
south.
you will have time to elaborate on this in the last round of question, because the fourth
Maybe
topic
by then
is,
I'll have an opposite answer.
you know about the Soviet diplomat who gave, in the old times, that gave a newspaper conference, and one of the reporters asked him, he gave the party line, and one of the reporters asked him, so, but sir, what is your opinion? So he said, oh, I have an opinion, but I'm against it. So this is, but who knows? We'll see how it goes. Okay, but yes, we will have time to deal with that. So last but not least, our friend Nabeel.
All right, look, we're talking about this as if it were a debating contest. War is about death and destruction. And if you look at what happened with 10 to 11,000 homes in Gaza destroyed, 100,000 people today are still without a home to live in. The death toll is between 2,000 and 2,500 on the Palestinian side, depending on which count you take. Israel has crushed Gaza yet again. So you ask who won. I mean, war is a fight, and the fight was won by Israel in a very crushing way. Politically, I agree with Shai. I mean, it ended with a stalemate. Israel gained nothing from its crushing blow. Its crime and punishment technique, once again, produces a political stalemate and no solution. Hamas gained a short-term boost in its popularity. But that's short-term. Once things settle down a little bit, the Palestinians in Gaza will go back to being critical Hamas. It's funny to say, I mean, the Palestinians and the Israelis go to war and Egypt wins somehow. And wins what? Against political Islam? I'm sorry. I mean, they came back to mediate, and they came back to another failure. Egypt has once again failed in its mediation between Hamas and Israel. Abbas has a supposedly new strategy. He's pushing the UN strategy. Short term, this is not going to lead to anything. So short-term loss. Eventually, however, I think he's gaining into whatever Israel is losing in terms of moral support in the international community. So he is going to gain, but it's going to take a while before that means anything at the United Nations. The US, John Kerry, I guess, is the biggest loser if you're looking at the political level. He didn't suffer any blows to the head, but there's no American initiative right now.
Thank you. We'll come back to Kerry. Thank you. This was great. I mean, we're doing well. I'm now going to the beyond part of the equation, and would like to begin with a theme that does not pertain to or relate to Gaza directly, but is somewhat linked, and this is the issue of sectarianism and the future of the Arab territorial nation state. And let me just introduce the topic very, very briefly, and the partial downfall of several authoritarian regimes following the Arab Spring unleashed multiple suppressed forces in the Middle East, primordial loyalties, ethnic identities, religious affinities, tribal kinships. And the result is chaos, conflicts, fragmentation, factionalism. So my question to you, and anyone who would like to pick this question is welcome to do so, is this the end of the geopolitical structure of the Middle East that we had known for a good number of years, mostly in the Fertile Crescent? Is this the end of the artificial boundaries drafted and crafted by the two imperial powers in the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement? This is part one. And part two, just in addition, what, if you wish to focus on that, what is the future of the Arab territorial state, which has integrated in several cases, integrated and reinstated itself, and the future is still to come. So I hope I made it clear. Anyone who would like to begin? Abdel Monem.
You know, the notion of artificial states has been said a lot about the Middle East, and particularly among Arab countries and African countries. However, I can't know of any continent in the world without artificial borders. I mean, a lot of states in Europe has been in flux over about 3 centuries and after globalization, we have the collapse of the Soviet Union, we have the collapse of Yugoslavia, we have the collapse of Czechoslovakia, and we have the collapse of Ethiopia. I mean, a lot of countries, the issue of the collapse happened because of, variety of historical reasons. However, regarding our area and the rise of sectarianism and stuff like this, I will put a kind of a reservation first that we got to be very cautious to make a judgment during the heat of the moment. I mean, the heat of the moment today get us the Kurds, the Yazidis, the Chaldeans, and the Shia, and the Muslims. It looks, the mosaic of the Middle East is hot potato. However, I will say that no matter what, every sect gets suffering of one sort or another. The alternative is downright hell. And I think, and I have some, evidence for that the choice at the end probably either we will keep the status quo or come close to it in new types of arrangements. Look at Iraq. Iraq almost in de facto division happened inside Iraq. And one day, Lebanon, de facto division happened. Yet, after seeing the cliff, we will find that a restoration that happened. In Iraq lately, just a few months ago, once it happened, the IS is taking over, and we found everybody is saying, could Malki leave? Some people said he will not leave. He left. And after that, can they make a president? They made a president, and they made a cabinet, and they made after that appointment of a defense minister. And now their forces are into give and take, winning and losing with IS. So, and there is an international coalition taking place. I mean, we have about large number of states that they are fighting into that the same process. Turkey, despite of all its objections, allowed the Kurds to get by to
So
the
excuse my
cities.
interruption.
So-
do you hint at the fact that the traditional Arab nation state would maintain its traditional cohesive bond despite these fragmentations and divisions and sectarianism and what have you?
Contrary to what is about the collapse of Sykes-Picot and stuff like this, my position is more or less, however, at the heat of this moment, that there is no way that the Arab state will remain as it is, not in terms of its territoriality, but in terms of its political regimes, economic regimes, the way how to deal with minorities as well. I mean, I think now this question is striking everybody on the head, as in Europe at one day there was what is the status of Catholics, what are the status of Protestants, what is the status of gypsies, whatever, people in other places of the world. I think now, after January 2011, the Middle East is not the same anymore. And there is a historical process that's happening. However, a maturation is happening as well. They will be under fire kind of changes that it will cover a variety of areas. But in terms of borders, I believe that it's just beyond borders is downright hell.
Okay, so there are a couple of issues here. There is the question of borders, to which I alluded to, which is, I agree with you. I mean, borders can change, but what is more important is the inner issues of minorities, democratization, to remind you, a term that was widely used when the so-called Arab Spring erupted 3 years ago, and other additional forces that sometimes notoriously are being referred to as modernization.
But it's not
So, Shai,
But
do you buy this?
No, but see, I think that the biggest revolutions are actually not so much internal, not so much inside the states, because you were alluding to a number of dimensions. I actually think that we are in a new Middle East. The question is it temporary? Is it a transition period to a different period, and so on? What are the dimensions? Two big dimensions. Number one is there is no organizing principle for the Middle East. Okay? In the 1950s and 60s, the Middle East was under the cloud of the Cold War. It was paralleled by an internal Arab Cold War between the revolutionary countries, Egypt, Syria, and so on, Iraq, versus the monarchies, and so on. There was an organizing principle. The Arab-Israeli conflict, in some ways, played a role as an organizing
Cohesive
principle. Okay? Now, there is no organizing principle. Everybody is against everybody, and the coalitions are changing rapidly. That's number one. Number two, the unit of analysis was states. States was the most important thing. Israel worried about Egypt, it was worried about Syria, it was worried about Jordan, and so on and so forth. What are we talking about? We're talking about now non-state actors determining the regional agenda. This is a completely different region. And so first of all, and what you see among leaders is confusion. Now, on the other side of this, you can say that this, now I don't know if I'm not jumping to your fourth question, it also gives...
I'll let you know,
It
don't worry.
also gives some opportunities. Okay, it gives some opportunities because they're in a situation in which, for example, when you talk about this, the impact of this on the Arab-Israeli conflict, Well, the fact that the Arab-Israeli conflict is no longer the top of the regional agenda also gives some opportunities. Israel today is another Middle East player, okay? And that gives opportunities. That still leaves the question of, will Israel take the opportunity? That requires creativity and it requires leadership.
I know. We'll get to Israel in due time, believe you me. But in the meantime, I'm trying to see what we're getting here. We're getting somewhat of opposing views, or actually yes and no, because the bottom line is that this is work in progress. We can't really, neither of you two could, you said at the heat of the moment one cannot judge. This is a progressive process, which the results of which we will see, and don't be impressed by borders.
I want to say something
Please.
in favor of work in progress.
I didn't say I was against. I'm just trying to summarize and...
I'm not saying I disagree with you.
So he's from the UN.
If you don't disagree with me, you're good.
And what I'm going to say is, of course, partial. It is based on findings of surveys among Arabs, recent findings, during surveys that were conducted in 2013 and 14. Obviously, as Abdel mentioned earlier, Arab public opinion is not going to make the final decisions about this particular question, but I think it would be a mistake to ignore what the publics want. The surveys indicate that there is support for the argument that sectarianism is winning. There is no doubt that sectarian tensions at the moment are extremely high, and the surveys show this very clearly. And they also show, however, why this is serious. If the state is still strong, if there are leaders with vision and charisma, they can overcome those sectarian tendencies. But there aren't any of those. And furthermore, democracy actually had received a very severe blow. And you're right, 3 years ago, the surveys that we've conducted indicated a great deal of optimism about the future of democracy in the region and the region's democratization. And the findings today show a tremendous retreat from that among the Arab masses. They also show, and this is in support actually of something Abdel mentioned, that the public is also losing confidence in political Islam. And this could very well, at a time when the public does not have strong leadership, losing confidence in democracy, losing confidence in political Islam, there is a vacuum. And Shai mentioned something about the lack of an organizing principle for the region. Well, at the moment, if I just look at public opinion, sectarian tendencies are very strong, and in places like Syria and Jordan and Iraq and in the North African states and in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, these sectarian tendencies are very explosive. What will perhaps shape, why is this some work in progress? It's because we still don't know how Iran, Turkey, Israel will behave in this environment. And we still don't know exactly where the US will stop, when the US will stop, and where in the current US strategy. So, and of course the armies, by the way, the only institution that Arabs today still have trust in are the armies.
The armies, the military.
The defense forces.
Defense. Nabeel, Khoury, please.
Right, I think this whole thing about Sykes-Picot is a bit of a misnomer. Sykes-Picot drew borders in the region, but they didn't really form the states that we have today. largely. They formed a few little ones. But I mean, Egypt was always there. It's still here. Syria and Iraq were always there historically. Sykes-Picot didn't create them. They just drew some borders. Saudi Arabia, same thing. The Arabian Peninsula was always there. So it became Saudi Arabia. And that's by virtue of what the Saudis did, the Saudi family, not really Sykes-Picot. So what I anticipate from all this struggle that's going on now is not the end of states, but maybe some redrawing of borders. And I don't think, although there is a strong sectarian aspect to the struggle, it's not the sectarianism that defines the struggle, because people to people are not struggling. You don't see the Shia and Sunni fighting each other in every country. You see extremist Sunni organizations and extremist Shia organizations fighting.
But how can the newly established state can accommodate all these new forces that came to the fore as a result of what happened in Al-Masry?
Well, it's
I
called
mean,
democracy.
what's the magic formula that will keep them all together when we see clearly that various groups, tribes, religion, what have you, are walking towards a more independent, sovereign-like path? Take the Kurds, for example. So what would bind them together? This is my question.
The magic formula is called democracy. These areas have been ruled by dictators. And under dictatorship, minorities rebel. This is what we're witnessing in Yemen today. If the Houthis had been treated well from the beginning, they would not have rebelled. If South Yemen had been treated well, it would not be seeking secession. And it's on and on the same deal. If Maliki had not abused the Sunnis of Iraq, they would not have welcomed ISIS into their midst.
Okay.
So eventually, here's where the Arab Spring comes in. Even though I don't use spring, I use the Arab uprising. Even though these uprisings are a bit of a mess right now, but they historically formed the beginning of the Arab revolt against dictatorship. And eventually, that's what you're going to have. The states, we're going to go back to Syria in some fashion. Whether the borders are redrawn a bit or not is another issue. Iraq will be there as a state. But eventually, they will become more democratic due to the pressures from their own people. And the extremism is a result of dictatorship in every country. This is an era, a phase that the region is passing through.
So are we going towards a democratization? I mean, are we?
Yes, but maybe not in my lifetime.
Oh, thank you.
But
Okay.
can I ask Nabeel something to sharpen your point about this? Because it struck me that when we talked earlier on the recent episode, call it the Arab-Israeli conflict, you mentioned the terrible loss of life, which is of course correct. 2,000 and something people of Gaza killed. When you talk about the future of Syria, it seems to me that you slightly glance over the question of so the Arab-Israeli conflict for the last 6 decades has been under this issue of the Nakba. Now, you see that somehow the Syrian society comes back after 200,000 people have been slaughtered. How? What is going to be the glue that will bring this thing together back after this? I mean, I cannot imagine a population. This is a civil war coming
Right.
out of this without a deep trauma.
Nobody in Syria has said that they are not Syrian. Not the Islamist extremists, not the Free Syria Army, not the bloody regime of Bashar al-Assad. None of them have said we are not Syrian. So what is happening is a fight between a bloody dictator and resistance to him. The chaos that resulted from that resistance brought in all the extremists that you want from all over the world. But eventually it will come back to a Syria. And I think Turkey ought to be listened to here because it keeps telling the US the problem is the Assad regime. They want to fight ISIS, but they want to fight the Assad regime as well because it is the one responsible for us having ISIS in such a bad way. So yes, Syria will survive, and it will be democratic, and we will get past this phase.
Okay, thank you very much. As you can see, the panelists are doing what they are expected to do. And there is no unanimous viewpoint, and as we progress in my
With
pages.
Khalil and I being the poor cousins, I noticed you put Israel and Egypt on the one side and Palestine and Lebanon here.
I'm just happy, Nabeel, that I finally found somebody who is even more of an optimist than I am.
Well,
Eventually.
Nabeel, I was just going to suggest that we play the musical chairs, that we are now going to switch, and,
No,
and
I'm
I'll
happy
put you
being
next to me.
Khalil, yeah.
No, it's good. Believe you me, we're all good. Anyway, apropos ISIS, so we now move to the next cluster that I have in my list, and this relates to political Islam. So I think that there are very few who would argue that one of the outcome, or one of the forces that has filled this vacuum that we all agree about is political Islam in various forms. I look at you, Abdel Monem, as an Egyptian, and within, what was it, a year and a half since the Arab Spring has begun, Egypt was taken over by Muslim Brotherhood regime, and legitimately so. It wasn't by force through a democratic process. Of course, we all know that since then things have changed. And I for one, believe that to a large extent, Islam does play the role of filling the vacuum. You have jihadist organization, non-actor forces that you alluded to all over, and of course, ISIS. How can we do without ISIS? So let me quote, since I'm personally interested in the topic and I've done some digging in it, let me quote from a recent book by Patrick Cockburn called ISIS and the New Sunni Uprising. And he says the following. He's a British journalist who has been many years in the region. ISIS poses the most radical change to the political geography of the Middle East since, I apologize, Sykes-Picot. But again, it's not accidental that I have chosen this quote. And my question is it true? But this is just a non-starter. What I really want to know is what are the causes beyond this eruption of the ISIS phenomenon? Why is it so appealing? Or if you agree that it is appealing and you don't dismiss it as a unimportant, you know, I have a special interest in the Arab population in Israel, the Arab minority in Israel. And look what happened within the, again, it's not a widespread phenomenon, but you see a growing number of young, educated Arabs who were born, raised in Israel, joining joining ISIS. So, you know what? I'll stop here. I mean, I have more sub questions to this issue, but I don't want to confuse, and I'll interfere as we try to struggle with this question. So, and to encapsulate it, I would say, is there a real threat from ISIS, as some say, or many say? And what's the background for its appeal? Abdel Monem, is it okay for you to begin?
Yeah, I
And
can
of course, the
start, and
Egyptian
I'll
scene.
start with the quote you just given us, because that's exactly what happens when we start thinking at the heat of the moment. You know, that we link Sykes-Picot and ISIS will go. That actually, we have a battle between modernity and Islamic ideas since the 19th century. And there was a lot of forces that kept postponing this battle. And the Arab Spring, which is, you know, you cannot take sectarianism as one, the rise of the army as a second, and the reservations about democracy on the third. You know, these are all very interactive variables in the process that tell us that there is a process of going to more militancy, and ISIS is a fascist manifestation of the right in Arab countries. And as such, it is a big challenge. The definition of situation is the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, not only in Iraq and Syria, in Libya, in Mali, in south of Algeria, south of Tunisia, in Sinai, in Yemen, and in other places. that is immediately a point that the people and nations of the region are facing a moment that Europe faced in 1933. And that is a danger that came out how we can get into psychological, socioeconomic analysis, a lot of things, but it happened. And now there is a manifestation. The way they are fighting the war reflect a kind of skill, an ability to recruit, and the ability to find money and armament and so forth. And they are there to play a role, and their genius actually is the ability to how to move from one theater of a battle to another theater. And I think those who are opposing it are still trying to find their way. Is it a limited war strategy in which it happens in a specific theater, and that is the theater on the Syrian-Iraqi borders, or it is a comprehensive theater that includes most of the Middle East? I happen to be on the second one, and I think it is essential to face, because you mentioned that, and we have cases in which youth, usually all the members who are fighting with ISIS are middle-class people, well educated. What happened to them is something will take more time from us to investigate. But it is not a social revolution for the poor. It is not an intellectual revolution for people who are on the extreme right. They are people who are mixing religion with fascist ideas of controlling
Does the idea of
societies.
reinstating caliphate appealing?
No,
or
it's
is
not
it-
appealing.
or is it just
That's why
daydreaming?
I find some of the things that Khalil said about the reverse now kind of polling, that the state is the one that's appealing. That's why I'm saying the territorial state. I remember during the Lebanon civil war, there was an article that caught me called Habibati Dawla, I love the state, because in the middle of the civil war, a Lebanese wrote that article. And I guess that's now the feeling in the region. Do we want to jump the cliff that the Muslim brothers were taking Egypt to, or we will make certain sacrifices and prevent that from happening? And I think it's a big question, because the states that are disintegrated, like Sudan, like Somalia, they actually didn't find heaven. I mean, they got the Muslim brothers, they got the jihadist group, they got the Qaeda, and they ended up with being collapsed, hungry, and divided the states. So now the fear of by the way, we should not ask about what's happening in Syria and Iraq. See what happened in Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf, in Algeria, in Morocco, in Jordan. I mean, states, either they are regrouping or they are already succeeded to fight and cross this phase of
Thank you, Abdel Monem.
of
Actually, you
disintegration.
paved the road for my next question, which is addressed to Khalil.
But I want to answer this question. You asked about political Islam.
Told you, this is the Middle
Just
East.
answer it. Don't ask for permission. Just jump in.
You ruined my. Okay, I'm sure you can link it to what you're going to say, because apropos Abdel Monem's comment about the what happens in so-called moderate Sunni state, your competitor David Pollock has published a poll 10 days ago or so, he looked at the question: how popular is the group ISIS in such countries as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon? I'm sure you've seen that. And the outcome was, in compliance with what you say, that there was a very low grassroots support for ISIS in these countries. So, is it true? Has he done a good work? Do you think differently? What does caliphate mean to you?
I'm not going to comment on David's work.
No, I'm joking. I'm just trying to, look, we're almost an hour here. We need to keep some
But
Some
without,
vibe.
without forgetting my disagreement with Monem, which will
Yes,
I'll
I'm
bring
sorry.
up on
It's
the
compiling now.
on the issue of Hamas and Abbas, which will be next, I guess.
Sure, it's coming.
On political Islam, actually, I agree with Abdel. The data supports the points Abdel has been mentioning. ISIS, I think, is the outcome of an opportunity. The opportunity of the vacuum created in Syria, the money that is poured from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates, and the medium that that Turkey provided for these people to get in and do whatever they wanted to do. But that's in part the reason why it is coming out now. It does not have a popular base except in those areas where sectarianism is on the rise. Those who fear the Shiites and the Shiite threat are looking at ISIS with much less of a critical eye than the rest of the population. Those who see a threat in Iran are looking at ISIS with some admiration. It's not a great deal. Public opinion is not yet being taken by ISIS. ISIS ideology does not mesh with mainstream Islamism. So they really will have an extremely tough time selling their ideology to the man in the street. This is not going to be an easy sell for them. But what they will be able to succeed in selling, if they succeed, is if they succeed in the battlefield, if they gain grounds, then they don't have to sell ideology, they can sell success. Now, why?
What do you mean by if? That's already happened.
Well,
you haven't taken
as
Baghdad yet.
As Abdel has been warning us,
This is,
let us not.
60 kilometers from Baghdad.
well,
The
let's
war
wait.
is still going on.
Don't look at things at the heat of the moment.
Right.
Follow
Thank you.
Abdul Monem.
You think you'd have gotten this audience without the heat of the moment?
Okay, Abdul
The
Khalil,
last
please.
point I want to make about this is there could be something that might sustain ISIS. That we're finding that mainstream Islamism, which is the Muslim Brothers, we did these surveys in 12 Arab countries. We asked them in all 12 countries to tell us how they feel about the Muslim Brothers. In all these countries, the Muslim Brothers appear in various names, but in every single case, this was the Muslim Brothers. In 10 out of the 12 countries, a majority, in some places, an extremely large majority, exhibited very negative sentiments. That's a significant change. Now, what is the implication for ISIS? I think ISIS is looking at mainstream Islamism with a great deal of disappointment. A lot of people these people are coming out of the failure of mainstream Islamism. And they, I believe, reflect a lack of confidence in the way that the mainstream, the Muslim Brothers, have been going. They look at what the Muslim Brothers have done in Tunisia and where they had to make terrible compromises in their views. And they look at what happened in Egypt and how the military just smashed them. And they say, that is not the way to go. We need to take a different route. And that is, if mainstream Islamism is destroyed the way it has been in Egypt, I don't think it has been completely destroyed, but there is no doubt that it has been dealt an extremely heavy blow. I think that blow could give us a lot of small ISISes in many places.
Thank you. Before I move to Khalil, a quick question to you, Shai. I know you're interested in strategic matters, intelligence, and so forth. Is ISIS a surprise, a strategic surprise that no one was aware of, that caught the intelligence services?
So what's new with that? Nothing with respect to the Arab awakening or the Arab Spring or the Arab, what was your term? Arab
Uprising.
uprising. None of this was expected. So this is just another surprise in a whole stream of surprises.
So what does it? What
that
can we learn from this?
Well, what we can learn from this is something that I think, some of us knew for a long, long time ago, which is that it's very, very, very difficult to read other countries and societies' internal dynamics and to predict where they will go. Israel. I mean, look at what happened in 1982 in Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon was an excellent example of a society less than 100 miles north of Israel, where the result of the war was based on premises that turned out to be completely and totally faulty, or represented faulty readings about this society. Let me make one more point, though, and this is just to remind all of us of something that in this conversation kind of is glossed over. But I would just put an exclamation mark on it, because it actually represents another dimension of this new phenomena, which is we're talking about all these dynamics, ISIS and the borders between Syria and Iraq and so on and so forth. Look, can you imagine a development of this magnitude, however transitory it is, happening in the 1950s or 60s or 70s without very strong influence of outside actors, of the superpowers, of the US, of the Soviet Union, of European powers, and so on and so forth? Now, remember, I mean, it's something that we're not discussing simply because we're not seeing this. But the fact that we're not seeing this is a revolution in the region. All of these developments are taking place without outside powers playing a major role in affecting the outcomes. And it's a vacuum.
Okay, thank you. By the way, I can't resist the dictum that says it's very difficult to make predictions,
Especially about the
particularly
future.
regarding the future. So this is more or less what you've told me, but we'll leave that.
What do you call American intervention by Air Force in the region? Is that a non-state actor?
No, but the thing is, I mean, what is it? This is essentially, first of all, it's essentially Hebrew. We have to call it the.
Don't talk in Hebrew.
No, I'm trying to find the English or Arabic translation of the term. Look, it is. Put it this way. I'll call it this way: a belated. You talked about strategy. What strategy? Is this a strategy? This is essentially a belated reaction that has only one purpose here: is damage control. Okay, that's it. It's to prevent the worst outcomes. But the reality is that that the U.S. is now getting involved after a long period in which it was essentially absent from playing a major role in the region. And I agree with Nabeel on this one.
Thank you for the comment. I appreciate that, because it did add. No, seriously, it did add an important dimension that definitely we'll not get to. But so patiently waiting. Nabeel, let me focus the issue, because we get very, if I may, learned responses, but I look at my questions and I don't get definite answers.
You're asking the wrong questions.
Great, Nabeel, you made my day. I'll sure invite you to the next panel. Seriously, Nabeel, in one word, is ISIS a threat?
No.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
No, let me explain. I think ISIS is a passing phenomenon. In the annals of the long history of the region, this too shall pass. Now, that doesn't mean in the short run they are not a serious threat that needs to be fought. They are a serious power. They are nastier and stronger than Al-Qaeda, and therefore confronting them is more difficult. But historically, I don't think this is lasting. They have zero chance of building their caliphate, zero. So they are not going to destroy borders. They're not going to unify all the Muslims of the world under this Baghdadi who claimed himself the position of caliph. But in the short run, they are shaking things up. And the war is going on. But the main thing, I think, you need to be careful not to conflate political Islam and ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So it depends when you do your polls. I know Dave Pollock, and he was a very good colleague at the State Department for a long time. I have much respect for his work. And the question that you ask, if you ask about ISIS, you're going to find very little popularity. Nobody really likes ISIS, except the young misfits, frustrated people who are joining its ranks all the way from the Chechen Republic to Afghanistan and the Arab world. But when you ask the population at large, no, they'd rather have a secure state. They don't want these guys who mean nothing but chaos and bloodshed. But if you ask the question about political Islam, that's a different question. Because political Islam is represented by a lot of different organizations and individuals and thinkers. With all due respect to my Egyptian friends here, they're conflating the two when they go after the Muslim Brotherhood, for example. Muslim Brotherhood is one thing, and ISIS and Al-Qaeda is something completely different.
Personally, I'm not sure I would
Unless
agree
they are
with you.
Qutbis.
But this is for, go ahead.
Unless they are Qutbis, because the Muslim brothers themselves are not one thing. Some of them belong to Hassan al-Banna, Tam al-Hadibi, and Sayyid Qutb. The Muslim brothers of Egypt, the elite of them, Morsi, Shatir, Mahmoud Izzat, all these are students of Sayyid Qutb.
Qutbis.
Mahmoud Izzat was with him in the prison, and he was, Muhammad Badi' was number 2 in the case that they were in prison. So here, if you have Qutbis, they are not far away from the others. That's why Morsi released the killers of Sadat, about 2,000 jihadists out of Egyptian prisons. And actually, he was not only releasing them, but actually he honored them in public events. In the 6th of October, in the day of the killing of Sadat, he made a rally, and they are attending. Tariq al-Zumur, Asim Abdel Magid, all the killers of Sadat were there. So you can't have, that kind and say they are something and the other something. Yes, I will agree. If you are talking about Al-Awa, if you are talking about Fahmi Wadi, fine, I think they are not the same. But the current leadership of the Muslim Brothers in the Arab world in particular, save Tunisia, you will find that they are mostly Qutbis.
Okay, thank you for this clarification. I think it adds a lot to to the nuanced situation. We're getting to the 2 last points before we start the real discussion. Seriously, my 4th point is Hamas and the Palestinian scene. And then we'll say a few words about Israel, and we're done. We solved the Middle East problem. So I'm looking at you, Khalil, because I assume you would begin. And again, 2 words of introduction. There is an ongoing competition between Hamas and the PLO over supremacy. PLO/Fatah, okay. Now we have a national unity government. How should we interpret this? I am a student of history, and we have learned in the last couple of years that there were many reconciliations, many unity governments. How serious is this bond? And does it reflect any weakness on Hamas's side, as was interpreted by some observers? Is Hamas indeed ready to give up monopoly over governance in Gaza to Fatah/PLO? I'll stop. I have more, but I'll stop here. And we'll start with Khalil, and then the other panelists are invited to join in. Not easy questions, I agree.
There is no doubt that during the past year or so, Hamas has been at the receiving end of Sisi's anger. The Egyptians have, the Egyptian military has been acting for more than a year now to cripple as much as possible Hamas's capacity in the Gaza Strip, and they have been very successful. The war in Gaza has reversed that somewhat, but I think it is temporary. I don't think Hamas's popularity, the current popularity, will last for long. But on the issue of reconciliation, I don't think Hamas will easily give up control over Gaza, and there is at the moment no tools that Abbas has to force them to do so. They are weak in terms of their ability to manage Gaza financially and administratively at this point. But they are still in charge of Gaza militarily. Their security services and their armed wing, Al-Qassam, is pretty much in control. And there is no way Abbas would be able, in a confrontation with Hamas, to take over Gaza. And Hamas is not, at the moment, about to give control to Abbas. He now has a nominal presence in Gaza. This nominal presence was given to him out of Hamas weakness. Hamas invited him to be in charge of the civil institutions, assuming that he would come in and spend the resources he has, which they do not have in Gaza, but without surrendering the control to him. This is a deal that was actually orchestrated by the Egyptians back in 2009, when Hamas was still very strong. In 2009, the Egyptians, in recognition of of Hamas's strength under Mubarak, proposed the deal that is now being implemented. Abbas now, however, looks at Hamas and say, why should I agree? Yes, he signed that agreement back then in 2009, but now he has second thoughts. And the regime in Cairo has changed. The Mubarak regime said, this is our proposal. We want you to sign it. Abbas signed it immediately on the spot. Hamas signed it 2 years later, and in fact did not start to implement it until this year. And Sisi now says to Abbas, this is really a dumb move. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have made this reconciliation government. It's not a national unity government, by the way. There's no unity involved. There is no national aspect to it. This is a government.
There is no government.
There is no government in Gaza. There is a Hamas shadow government in Gaza. All the ministers, Hamas's ministers have resigned or left their offices, but the deputy ministers are all Hamas. And these ministers continue to function. And the ministers the official reconciliation government ministers, have not yet, until today, have not yet assumed any direct control. Part of the problem is technical, part of it is political. The technical part is who pays the salaries of the public sector. And these are essentially, 80% of them are Hamas people. And Abbas doesn't want to pay them, but to have control over Gaza, he must. But neither the Americans nor the Israelis are happy to allow him to do that. And as long as this is the case, no bank in the world would pay salaries to this public sector. So how do you pay them? Sure. And so without paying them, however, Abbas cannot have real control over Gaza, even if he wanted to, and assuming he wants to. And I think at this point, he's having second thoughts. He does not want to have control that does not include security control over Gaza.
But Khalil, if we go along the lines of Abdel Monem, of looking at this at the longer term, I mean, there is now some talk about, or some analysis about, the beginning of a serious internal debate in Hamas. My question is, in a situation in which the basic parameters haven't changed, Hamas has not been able to relieve the population from a situation in which we have to admit, as Israelis, as Egyptians, as human beings, this is one gigantic prison. And it's been one gigantic prison for a long time. And the question is then, how long can Hamas sustain a situation in which everybody else is to be blamed for this prison without any serious questioning about changing the parameters of Hamas's policy to do what is required of Hamas to change the situation in which where the fundamental and basic requirements of the population can be met.
Okay, before Khalil answers that, since I have the clock just in front of me, thank you, Shai, for this input. May I tie your comment to my last question in this? Yes, your question in the form of comment, or comment in the form of question. Thank you for that. We have upcoming elections. I don't know when.
Where?
In the Palestinian regions, or supposed to be. That's better. Okay. Can we tie this all together and ask any one of the panelists to make a prediction, and clearly so, as to what will happen in the West Bank?
The best one to answer this one is Khalil.
Khalil? Okay. Khalil, you've been named as the official representative
Do you want me to
of the
answer
group?
Shai's question as well?
Very briefly, if possible. Very, very briefly.
Hamas
Very
can
briefly.
Hamas can tolerate this situation for a long time. Why? Because the situation, the humanitarian conditions in Gaza after the war, this is the impact of the Gaza war now brought to bear on the reconciliation arrangement. The humanitarian conditions and the deterioration there is forcing the international community to come into Gaza and provide relief. This relief gives Hamas an extended life. Hamas's position, therefore, to be stubborn and to resist Abbas's attempts, which are not serious attempts, but whatever they are, Hamas continues to resist them and will continue to resist them for some time to come. I don't know for how long, but you're absolutely right. There is a debate, however, within Hamas, and at this point, this debate has not been made public, and we don't know where it is going or heading. But if indeed the discussion that is taking place within Hamas is to move in the direction that I suspect it will eventually move into, Hamas could, in fact, begin to release its control over Gaza to a government that might be elected. Assuming we are able to address all the other nasty questions of how do we get to elections. And at this point, we don't have the answer to those questions. If elections are to happen tomorrow in the West Bank, Hamas will win.
Okay. Hamas will win?
Will win. But elections will not happen tomorrow. And they will take perhaps somewhere between 6 months to 18 months, to be realistic. And what will determine, therefore, the outcome is what happens in those months. Is Abbas able, in my first answer to your first question, I said Abbas was the big loser. If he continues to be the big loser, then there's a very good chance Hamas will do very well in those elections. If Abbas manages somehow to resuscitate his legitimacy and gain public support, and Fatah has to do the same, and if he manages to hold Fatah Congress, which is scheduled to take place around the end of the year, if he is to manage to do that and to unify Fatah behind him, most importantly, win the public support from Marwan Barghouti from jail, if he manages to do that, there is a good chance that the current situation would be reversed. And Fatah, along with other forces, again, there are a lot of ifs here, but in other words, I'm saying it is not inevitable that Hamas will win.
Thank you. Last but not least, post-war Israel. And the question I have, I would address to Shai directly. And this is the domestic Israeli politics. This is what I want you to focus on. One, and the other two is the change in Israel's security paradigms. But let's begin with the first one. We read, just today, the other day, we read about talks about upcoming elections, that Mr. Netanyahu would decide to, you answer.
This is noise.
Oh, fine, noise is also something. But more seriously, we are reading more and more about the constraints that Israeli politics has got itself into. This straitjacket with the growing impact and power of the right wing, and to some extent even the dissolution of the Israeli left, which was left out. So what's your take on this, and what is the impact of the future of the peace talks? By the way, there was a rumor at least that Abu Marzouk hinted that he doesn't rule out talks with Israel. Now, I know he didn't repeat it 5 times, but I don't know to what extent this is worth anything. But I do know that there are behind-the-scenes scenes. And we should also, my humble contribution, we should take this into account. Shai,
So
the floor is yours.
Let me actually
3 minutes.
Let me actually start from where you ended, okay? Which is really the connection between this question and the previous question. And I will say the following. As far as Israel is concerned, in its relations with the Palestinians, and especially in relation to Gaza and Hamas, which is, we're all in the aftermath of this, is that nothing will change here unless there is going to be a basic reorientation on the Hamas side and on Israel's side. On Hamas side, it's very simple. As long as Hamas does not accept Israel, let's say not accept Israel's legitimacy, but accept Israel to the same extent that Fatah accepted Israel in 1988 when it adopted in Tunis essentially the idea of an independent Palestinian state, which was interpreted as accepting the 2-state solution. As long as that doesn't happen, Israelis will continue to see the struggle with Hamas as an existential struggle, and will not change its position, and will not change the attitude towards Hamas and towards Gaza, and will continue to do its share together with the Egyptians that have a different set of considerations which happen to coincide with Israel of isolating Gaza. It's not going to change unless Hamas changes its fundamental attitude towards Israel. Israel on its side has to make 2 changes. Number one, it has to accept that Hamas is a reality. And it is part of the Palestinian reality that Israel has to deal with. And it has to measure, in a sense, it has to say, okay, either in a unity government or a government of experts or whatever, and so on and so forth, as long as that government is willing to deal with Israel, is willing to coexist with Israel, and so on and so forth, this is what matters, and not the issue of what is in the Hamas charter or not. And this is, and I'm saying this despite the fact that I think that to affect Israeli policy, Hamas has to change its stances. But the second and most important thing is, Israel has to empower Abbas, and it has to empower the Palestinian Authority. And unfortunately, it's done exactly the opposite. In a sense, Hamas can argue legitimately to its constituency, unfortunately, that Israel only understands force. Because the fact of the matter is that the kind of concession that Israel made in the Gilad Shalit deal of releasing 1,100 prisoners to Hamas, and not ever making similar gestures to Abbas to create a situation in which Abbas can present himself as a winner in the Palestinian domestic scene is a fundamental mistake. A situation in which Israel continues to argue with the PA over ridiculous issues. I mean, how long did it take to get the authorization to open an 800-meter road to this new city called Ruabi? And now there is the question of the water, of how water will be transplanted to this idea that you cannot imagine a more progressive idea as far as the Palestinian. So there is a sense that there is talk about the fact that you're not going to take the risk of a political deal, but you are in favor of economic peace. So at least implement what is required to implement a successful economic peace. Even that is not happening. So I think that unless Israel adopts a completely different strategy, which means a strategy to affect the hearts and minds of Palestinians, to show them that it's beneficial to be pro-peace, okay? And that means empowering Abbas and doing exactly the opposite of what we're doing with Hamas.
How popular is this viewpoint in Israeli public opinion?
The problem in Israeli public right now, as I said, is that, and it's now tied to the first part of your question, there is a huge, huge crisis in leadership in the center of the map, and I would say definitely in the left of center. The left of center, not the left of center, but the left cannot persuade the center. The center is still driven by fears. And unless these concerns and fears are addressed, and the fears focus on this question of the fear that the reality that they see in South Lebanon and the reality that they see in Gaza, and now, of course, the chaos around Israel, the fear that we will see this appearing in some form or fashion in the West Bank is helping, because the ideological right is still in a minority. But what is happening, what is allowing the ideological right to in a sense, set the agenda is because the center is frozen. It's frozen by the fear of what will happen if Israel does make the concessions necessary. And as long as we don't have an answer to that, as long as you don't have a leadership that arises in the center that has a convincing story to tell to the public, we're not going to see a change.
A quick follow-up question. What happened to the Israeli left? Where is it gone?
Look, my answer to what happened is, and I don't want this
I
to
asked
sound,
your answer.
I'm giving you the answer. But I don't want the answer to sound as if I'm blaming the Palestinians, okay? So, the answer is, what happened to the Israeli left is called the Second Intifada, okay? And I'll just give you, I will substitute Khalil's macro surveys with my sister. My sister and her husband attended for at least 10 or 15 years every Peace Now demonstration in Tel Aviv. But when the suicide bombing started, and she had to worry about whether she's going to permit her 2 teenage daughters to go to a shopping mall, to go to the cinema, to go to a coffee shop, and so on and so forth, it's not that my sister changed her fundamental views or her husband's views about the fact that to preserve Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, there has to be an independent Palestinian state. But the fact of the matter is that since the Second Intifada began, my sister has not participated in a single demonstration. That's what happened to the Israeli left.
Thank you. Okay, I'm looking at my watch, I'm looking at that watch, I'm looking at you. I think it's time for us to wrap up. But I still have one identical question. We started with one identical, I didn't tell you that. And I just...
Surprise attack.
Yes, not attack, why attack? I just thought about it, because I'm asking myself, how does this esteemed audience come out of this session? So what's the bottom line?
Prozac.
Well, that does it. Prozac was the answer. Prozac, pill. Okay, in addition to Prozac, what do you make out of this situation? Each of you, please. What do you take out of this? What do you bring into this? I'll add my own personal word in a minute, but I think very, very shortly, in 1 or 2 sentences, if you can put some order and a personal conclusion that you have reached or would be reaching after this session here, I would be very grateful. And we'll start from the right to the left.
I was about to tell you, this kind of a question is above my pay grade. But I will tell you,
Please.
The concluding points that I will
Hey, your pay grade is quite high.
I think, from the complexity we have, that's not new to anyone of you, the complexity of what's happening in the Middle East. But I guess what will put us together, actually, and the people who made the book and taught the course we did, is the idea of peace. And I will put it in a simpler equation. And probably we will need to work on it more. I don't think that peace can be accompanied by occupation for Israel.
By
side.
occupation.
I mean, you can't have occupation and have peace in the same time. And for the Palestinians, you can have a Palestinian state while them and the Arab world find a way to have, for Israel, a place in the Middle East by which the feeling is the Middle East with Israel is much better than having the Middle East without Israel.
Thank you. Shai, you need to rest a little bit.
No, I will.
I will go to.
I was going to agree with Abdel.
Yeah. We'll get to you in a minute. Nabeel, please. What's your take?
I agree with Shai that the Hamas, in times of conflict, gets some strength, political strength and popularity. The US and Israel have done a very poor job empowering Abbas for all the compliments that he gets for his moderation. He doesn't get anything real, substantial, to give the Palestinian population to make him a powerful leader. There is, and I think ultimately what we have to worry about is Hamas, for all the US and Israel both classify it as a terrorist organization. It's the fig leaf behind which we hide the lack of policy and lack of strategy. But I again agree with you that ultimately Israel has to deal with Hamas. Hamas goes up a bit, goes down a bit, but it's a reality that you have to confront, deal with, not in a bloody way, but ultimately in a political manner. Unfortunately, Qatar has been marginalized in the region. And Saudi Arabia has refused. I mean, even here in Chicago, I think we tried a couple of times to get, I wrote something about the Saudi Arabia and Israel coming up with a new peace initiative. But the Saudis refuse to come out from behind their shell. Qatar is a better moderator, but it has been marginalized. And right now there is a total stalemate. Either the US comes up with a detailed Oslo plan and imposes it, or we're going to see more of the same. Another intifada is about to start. The situation is very tense in Jerusalem, and the West Bank and Gaza will follow, and we'll have another vicious cycle of violence.
Thank you. Shai, 2 sentences, and then Khalil will end the round.
My sentence,
2 sentences.
My sentence goes back to what I already said, which is to say that this situation actually, where there's a lot of flux in the region, and this is the positive side of the coin of the fact that there are no organizing principles. But one of the organizing principles that has vanished, as I said, not vanished, but it no longer comprises a regional organizing principle, is the Arab-Israeli conflict. At least the importance given to the conflict in the region has dramatically declined. This is an opportunity for Israel. And I'll make a small correction to what Nabeel said. The Saudis have actually been sending positive signals in the last year. Look, in the realm of the surprises, okay, you had a session in Brussels a couple of months ago where Prince Turki Al Faisal, the former head of the Saudi security services, former ambassador to Washington, former ambassador to the UK, appears on a panel with General Amos Yadlin, the former director of Israeli military intelligence. That was a very, very strong signal. But we have to remember that, or Israelis have to remember, that if they are to change the game, it requires certain things from the Israeli side. And I agree with Abdel Monem about the general direction. Unfortunately, I think that the Palestinians are in a way too weak to address the Israelis' security concerns that are involved in changing their attitude about holding security control over the West Bank. The Arab states are the only ones that can come in and, in a sense, substitute for the Palestinians and assure Israelis that if they accept what Abdel Monem said and end occupation, the result will not be a repetition of Gaza and Lebanon. Only the Arab states can do that.
Last but not least, Khalil Shikaki.
I would ask you to pray for peace.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
But they
You can lead us in prayer now.
I can do a lot of things. This I cannot. Sorry.
But you should, I think, brace for a very rough period in the next few years. Israeli-Palestinian relations will most likely deteriorate diplomatically and otherwise. The increased popularity of Hamas, the decreased legitimacy of Abbas means, and Israeli behavior, particularly in Jerusalem, all these are creating a mix that could be extremely dangerous. I don't think we're talking about an intifada similar to the second intifada. I don't think we're talking about that kind of violence. But I think the Israeli-Palestinian relations are moving, inching. It's not, no one is rushing. But I think we are inching gradually in a direction of a confrontation in many ways, including violence, but not in a big violent way. And we're waiting for someone to pull us back from that. And that one we always thought would be the US. So pray for that too, for the US to become more engaged, for the US to use its leverage. So as you pray for peace now, pray for that. I do not have a lot of confidence that anyone will save us.
Thank you, and I could not think of a better conclusion to this session, Khalil. I'm being serious for a moment. Yeah, I think prayer could help after what we've heard here. I personally, just one word, I believe that out of the chaos, some sun will come out. I don't know when. I'm a student of history, and it's going to be a lengthy process. But I think that eventually this will happen. Please join me in thanking the